And then it's my big pleasure today to introduce Auke Slotegraaf. Auke is a psychohistorian, and that is the mathematical modeling of human behavior, and has a deep passion for the sky, for the deep sky. He is the editor of the Astronomical Society of Southern Africa's annual Sky Guide and serves as the chair of the Center for Astronomical Heritage. This format's slightly different today. We're going to watch Auke's screen, and I just ask that we can please put any questions that we're going to have. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the talk. We can please put those into the chat, into the Q&A box, and then I can get to them, and Auke we'll have some questions and answers at the end of the session. So Auke, thank you very much for joining us. We're looking forward to this, and over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett, and hi everyone. It's a great honor to be invited to give a talk with you today. In fact, I thought I would like to start our time together by sharing two personal anecdotes. So rather quixotic and idiosyncratic, so bear with me. The first one happened to me in the days when cell phones were huge. I don't mean popular, I mean they were like the size of a very modest pizza. I was driving from the center of Cape Town to the observatory, and this hunking phone was on the seat next to me, and every now and then the phone would ping, and on the display would appear a name. It was that of the nearest cell phone tower it had just connected to. And I realized in that moment that I was being flooded with information, but that I couldn't decode it. Now, in a similar way, I've driven from Cape Town to Sutherland in the Karoo many times, and, along that long road, the road inches higher and higher above sea level. By the time you're at the gate of the observatory in Sutherland, you've climbed about 1,500 meters up into the sky. However, on one particular trip, I was accompanied by my friend Edward, who's an expert geologist and part-time fossil hunter. So we were both moving through the same landscape, following the road, where from time to time it goes through a road cutting. And of course, that exposes layers of rock. But all I saw was rocks and rocks and rocks and a bossy and then maybe some more rocks. I was being flooded with information, but I couldn't decode it. But Ed, he could. He could identify the various strata that the road was cutting through. So afterwards, I realized that I traveled through more than 300 million years of Earth's history, but was blissfully unaware of this. And I think something similar might happen when one looks up at the night sky for the first time. I think probably at first, beyond the immediate, wow, this is beautiful, is perhaps a sense of billions and billions of stars scattered around recklessly, or rather overwhelming. But let's just quickly do a fact check. Sure, it might be overwhelming, but really there aren't that many stars at all. If you've got super duper eyesight and you can somehow see right through the planet Earth, you'd be able to count about 6,000 stars. But, since the Earth is blocking half your view, you're down to about 3,000. And that's if you've got excellent vision at a really pristine dark site. If you're in sort of a modest suburb or a rural area, that number comes down to about 800. And if you're in the city, sure, maybe 20, maybe 30. Now, 800 is still a lot. But to a stargazer or somebody who's a practical astronomer, there is some order in this chaos, because we use the idea of a constellation to group stars together in a make-believe pattern. Over there is the whale, here's the horse with wings, there's a man on a motorbike, and there's a triangle. So I'd like to suggest this is one way that we can use to read the sky by looking for asterisms. So asterism is just a pattern of stars, or constellations, which is just a pattern of stars, except it's the official ones, right? Now, in case you think these particular constellations are really ancient, they totally are not. It was only in 1930, so that's less than 100 years ago, that the constellations were for the first time firmly defined. Before that, things were sometimes a bit up for grabs. It wasn't quite clear which constellation a given star belonged to. These earliest constellations were all depictions of monsters or gods. Many were entities from Greek mythology that the ancient Greeks really admired. So it was a tumultuous night sky that the ancients saw. Now, if you think about it, the ancient Greeks are sitting in, well, ancient Greece, and they cannot see the stars that are around the South Pole. So for them, that part of the sky, of the universe, of the heavens, that was terra incognita. And it remained like that for a long time. Some Dutch voyagers would go around the Cape and notice something and, probably smoke a spliff and forget what they saw. But it took a Frenchman in the 1750s to really come down and sort things out. And this was a guy called Nicolas Louis de Lacaille. And Nick was really into cutting edge high-tech stuff. He would have had the latest iPhone and a tablet and a Neuralink plugin and so on, because his job was to come and measure the southern stars, to delineate the constellations, and to, in fact, to form them, because there weren't any. So he had all the cutting edge things he put in there. He wasn't going to go with ancient Greek gods and sea monsters and waffle. He was going to go with the pendulum clock and the air pump and the chemical furnace, all these modern things. He put a microscope in there, and he also put a telescope in there. But quite frankly, telescopium is so tiny, you need a microscopium to see it. Now, of the 88 constellations that we currently, or that we regard as official ones, Lacaille generated 14 of them. And two of them I'd like to pause on for a short moment, because they tell us something quite interesting, I think, about him. One of them is a constellation called Reticulum. And you might think of a crosshair like in a gun sight or something. But this reticulum was actually a diamond-shaped pattern. And this was an invention that he made, and he used this in his telescope to zone in and to measure the star positions even more accurately than was usual. So he, sort of kind of put himself up there a little bit as one of the constellations. Reticulum. So for those of you into UFOs and other nonsense, you might know Zeta Reticuli. That is, of course, the home star of the gray aliens. Those are the ones who go drink driving and then crash land on Earth. A second constellation that Lacaille made that I think is very curious, and I'm sure you will agree with me soon, is much, much closer to home. And it's the constellation Mons Mensa, which is simply fancy talk for Table Mountain. And it's in the shadow of Table Mountain that I would like to take our story next. I've marked two locations. If you can see the Google map, I've marked on the left one called Feldhausen, and further to the right at the edge, the observatory, the SAO. That's the South African Astronomical Observatory. It was formerly the Royal Observatory, Cape of Good Hope. And of these two locations, I'd like to take a look at Feldhausen first, sort of kind of like doing it maybe ass backwards in time. If we go to modern day Feldhausen, we find a school and nothing apparently untoward until you really zoom in and you see in the courtyard there's something dodgy. You can see by that long shadow, this is something yay tall. That is an obelisk, and it marks a very special position where some special folk with some special kit were active in Cape Town. And by special folk, I really mean this guy and his wife. So this is John Herschel. By this time already, he was Sir John Herschel. And he came with his wife, Margaret Herschel, and a whole bevy of kids to Cape Town in 1834. They were here for 4 years, in which he did a remarkable amount of work. And with him he brought at least two pieces of special science kit. The first was, of course, a telescope, but not just any telescope. This was one that his dad had designed and built, and later taught him how to build. His dad was a chap called William Herschel. William Herschel hailed from Hanover in Germany. He was in the military band. Didn't much care for all the war things that were going on. So he left or absconded or traveled or whatever to England, where he settled down, looking for work as a musician. He would later be a virtuoso celloist, so he wasn't a slouch. Anyway, and when he was in his 30s, his real hobby, astronomy, became a passion, and he decided he wanted to build a telescope. It's kind of an odd thing for a person to do, but William wasn't a normal bloke. Now, at this time, when he was acting, so this is the late 1700s, professional astronomers were interested in measuring star positions. That was what you did. You didn't wonder about black holes and think about quantum doohas and so on, and galaxies and things that go bang in the night. You measured star positions. Star name, X position, Y position, brightness. Repeat. And these guys were using, they were mostly guys, they were using mirrors to gather light. And the mirrors were somewhere between 2 inches and about 6 inches in size. So that was kind of the size of a professional telescope. And William decided he's going to go a bit bigger. So he made a mirror that was 1.2 meters in diameter. That's 48 inches in old numbers. This telescope would be the largest in the world for 50 years. But his most productive telescope, because these things are massive, you'll see now how big they are, was one that had a mirror that was half the size, about 50 centimeters. And this is what the instrument looked like in 1834. It's erected, it's a sketch made by John Herschel of their backyard showing the telescope set up. And after this sketch was made, the telescope was dismantled and packed into crates and boxes and things and shipped off with him and his family and his many kids to Cape Town. He arrived in Cape Town. He bought Feldhausen, the home I showed you earlier. They moved in and got all the amenities and cell phone reception and all that. And then he set the telescope up a short distance from their living house to begin his survey of the southern sky. John had just completed a survey of the northern hemisphere. He'd looked at everything that could be seen many times from the north. And now his plan was to come to the south and do the same here. Do an overlap and become the first chap to see everything all over the place. In this illustration, which he drew, we'll talk about that in a minute, you'll see there's a small little building on the right. He had a second smaller telescope in there. This one had a lens. And that was because he was interested in looking at various kinds of astronomical objects. The smaller telescope was used to measure double stars. Many stars in the universe are not single like our sun. Our sun is a bit odd. They're multiple stars, 2 or 3 in a system. And astronomers, were really interested in studying them. Now, the mirrors that he brought 3. My gran always told me, like, what a hanky, one is for show and one for blow. And the same with these early mirrors. The mirrors could tarnish quite quickly, so they would lose their shiny luster. Today, if we think of a mirror, like in your bathroom, you can walk up to it and you can poke it, and what you're touching is glass, the shiny bits at the back. So that's sort of the normal, house mirror. But if you go up to Sutherland and you walk into one of the domes there and you touch their mirror, somebody's going to smack you, because the glass is at the back. The glass is just a backing or a substrate or a support that will hold the shiny surface. So that's modern glass mirrors. But we back in 1830s, 1840s, they hadn't figured out yet how to do that, to make large glass blanks and then put a silver coating on them. So the Herschel's mirrors were solid metal. It was a mix of 68% copper and 32% tin. They called it speculum, for reasons. And it's a thick chunk of metal. Very heavy. The nice thing about this is that you could, with a lappy, you could wipe them extremely efficiently, and they would be so shiny, they would look like it was a silvered mirror, but they were actually just a copper and tin mix. So that was the one bit of kit that that Herschel brought. And for a while, as I said, he had 3 mirrors. And for a while, one of the mirrors was kind of lost. And then in 2016, Ian Glass and Willie Koorts and myself managed to track the mirror down to sort of an Area 51-ish storeroom of his Eco Museum. So here's where we found the mirror, opened it up. Everything looked fantastic. You can see Willie looks as handsome as ever there on the right-hand side. And it was taken back to the observatory, and today it is in the Astronomical Museum at the SAO in Cape Town, where you can go and visit it. I said that he brought 2 bits of kit. The other thing he brought was a really cool gadget called a camera lucida. It sounds very complicated, but it's extremely simple. You can see that advert on the left showing how you should be properly mustachioed and attired when you use your camera. The one on the right is mine. It's just basically a long sort of gooseneck thing, and then it has a prism or a half silvered mirror, depending. And you angle that mirror or prism at the thing you want to draw. And if you then stand directly above it and you look straight down, you can see your hand on the paper, obviously in focus because, there. But you also see superposed over that an image of the thing that's directly ahead of you. So you could, with care, you could trace off essentially as much detail as you wanted to get a very exact rendering of the thing that you were seeing. And this is what John spent a good deal of time doing in the daytime when he wasn't, counting and measuring stars and examining galaxies that are millions of light years away. He'd earlier married Margaret, and she was an accomplished artist. So the 2 of them made a really good power couple, because John's second love, probably his third love, but I'm assuming it's wife astronomy, and then it was botany. And they had a field day examining all these brand new Deezers and orchids and proteas and all sorts of other Cape plants. And he would use the camera lucida and would meticulously draw the outlines and structural details using a pencil. And Margaret would then step in and apply the watercolors. So together they produced over 130 very exacting botanical illustrations of Cape flora. I was going to tell you a story about Darwin, but I think I'm running out of time. So let's skip to when they leave South Africa for when they leave to England, and sorry, I forgot myself. Here are 2 examples of the sketches that the 2 Herschels worked on together. When they left for England in 1838, the exact place where the telescope center stood, they erected this obelisk. The one on the left is an old photo. I'm not too sure about the date, but I'm not too sure about the date of the one on the right either. But you can see that quite some time has passed as the school has mushroomed up around it. When John got home, he realized he had a problem, although he knew this all along. He'd collected a huge pile of written notes and observations and diaries, and of course, sketches, not only of the plants, but also of things seen through the eyepiece. And he needed a way to make copies of these. It's no good if you're the only one with the notes. You've got to get it out there. Now, thoughtlessly, nobody had yet invented the Xerox or the laser printer, so he had to invent his own method. So he went ahead, and by 1842, he'd figured out a way of making duplicates. So for the first time, you could photographically duplicate something, and you could have as many copies as you wanted to. The way that he did the duplicate, because he was a good chemist, it resulted in an image that was tinted with Prussian blue. So he called this method a cyanotype. And you and I probably know this better as a blueprint. So blueprints from, as I'm sure you've all seen, these all go directly back to John Herschel, who needed to find a way to photocopy his notes. His new method could easily be taught to other people, and he did so. He told everybody and their uncle how to do it. And one of the people that he shared this with was a friend of his who was a botanist, Anna Atkins. And she was thrilled when she saw how this could be done, and she promptly produced the world's first coffee table book. In 1843, she published her book called British Algae, which is widely considered to be the first book illustrated with photographic images. And that's an example of some of the pages from the book. So it's interesting to realize that this was the first time that you could very precisely reproduce either an object or a photograph or a sketch or a painting or something like that, which we will touch on again. So John's botanical work pushed him into experimenting with what he really wanted to achieve, and that was to figure out how to do color photographs, because that still remained a puzzle. He tried lots of experiments where he would crush flower petals and then mix chemicals with those juices to try to make a photosensitive coloring agent. His method worked, but it was not practical. Sadly, he passed away before he could figure out how to do that. And I think I have to mention, we probably all know who Isaac Newton was, Sir Isaac Newton, buried in Westminster Abbey. But few people seem to remember John Herschel, and Herschel was buried next to him in Westminster, because he really was one of the real sort of glitterati of science at the time. Okay, that brings me to our next stop, which will be the observatory itself. As I said, it's the Royal Observatory. It's a really interesting place. You'll see now what it looked like back in the day when it was founded. It was created officially in 1820 when the King of England said, "We need the best observatory in the multiverse." And he said, "We will have 2 observatories in the universe, and they will both be royal observatories, and we will give them the best equipment," which then happened. They designed 2 observatories, duplicated the equipment. Somehow they forgot to put toilets in the one in Cape Town. I don't know how that happened, but that led to the observatory being built. This is the observatory as it is approximately today. And sort of just the feature you need to focus on is this H-shaped building, which was called the main building. And that was originally also the only building. So there was a little kopje surrounded by a swamp, and there were renoster's and all sorts of villa things in the swamp. And then on top of the swamp were even more villa things, which were, of course, the astronomers. Here's an 1834 sketch of the observatory, and you'll notice you don't see the Amazon warehouse anywhere, right? There's warehouse. There's like There's a windmill, and that's it. These sketches are made by a rather curious chap um, who was called Thomas Bowler. I never know if it's Bowler or Bowler, but anyway, he's the famous arty one. And he came to work at the observatory. I don't know what his job was, chief cook and bottle washer or something, but he was kicked out. There were scurrilous rumors, and those pages have been redacted, much like the Epstein files. But while he was there, he made these really, really exquisite sketches, which are a great time capsule of what the structures were like and what the environments were like. And you might begin to see a problem here. These original sketches are at the observatory in Cape Town, and that's pretty much where they are because they were drawn in that year, and there was no obvious way to reproduce things. The way you would reproduce things would lead to something like this. This is a drawing made 2 years later by a fantastically interesting guy called Charles Piazzi Smythe. He was fantastic for so many reasons, one of which is, or the least of which, is that when he got the job as the assistant to the Astronomer Royal, he was 16 years old. So young little 16-year-old Charles comes to Africa, and accomplished artist, and he begins to draw and sketch things. So here's a drawing he made of the main building. You can see the two domes. Those domes didn't last long. They were horribly designed. The beams they were on, the wood they were on was all wobbly. And when the wind blew, it felt like they were going to fall over. So they were turfed pretty soon. But so he drew a beautiful sketch. But in order to reproduce it, somebody called an engraver or a sculptor had to sit with his sketch in the one hand and a copper plate in the other, and then a sharp pointy tool called a burin, and had to scratch into the copper marks and stripes and doohickeys and things that would kind of correspond to what Piazzi Smythe's ink or pencil sketch looked like. And it was that etching that was then finally reproduced, which is what we see here. So it's non-ideal for many reasons. One of which, of course, is that, again, there's no color. If you wanted a color picture, here's one drawn by a military guy called Kendall. If you wanted something like this, then you had to, again, sit and do the pencil work, with the ink work. And then you had to get out your Cokies and Crayolas, and you had to watercolor the colors in. And then, of course, again, the problem is you can't reproduce these things. And then something miraculous happened. 1842, that precocious little Charles Piazzi Smythe, he brought with him the latest doohickey. He brought with him a camera. And these are calotypes that he took, photographs of the observatory and the environment. So this photo and the ones he took in a series are the oldest photos taken in South Africa. And they are also the oldest photos of any observatory anywhere in the world. And dis sommer net hier in Kaapstad. I think really, I think that's quite lekker. If there's time, we can talk more about the problem of reproduction, but I mean reproducing images. But for now, I want you to imagine you've booked a visit and you've come to an open night or to a special tour of the observatory. And I want you to imagine that it's the right time of the year. And if you walk kind of there where my cursor, I don't know if you can see my cursor, if you sort of walk there and you skedaddle between these trees and that building, this patch of grass here, as well as a little bit down this way, this is home to a unique member of the observatory, is this beautiful Morea aristata, or die blauwig eentjie. I know nothing about biology, botany, zoology, all those things, so please excuse me, go and Google all the stuff I'm saying because I'm probably making things up. But the Morea is endangered, and it blooms from time to time in the observatory grounds. And now you two know where to go and find it. So tread lightly when you go down that road and down there, and especially that patch of lawn. Of late, that area is camped off around the time as an attempt to preserve the terrain. Okay, but back to what we were talking about. So far, I've purposely been reading the night sky from a predominantly European point of view. This is just a matter of human history. It's how things played out. It's how the cards have fallen, the dice have thrown, so to speak. But now that we know this, and we're aware of biases and context, we can go and look elsewhere to see how other people might have different traditions and customs and how they have read the sky. So far, one pattern that we see in the constellations is the idea of a constellation that we play connect the dots. Join these three stars together and you get the voorleier, or and there's a rocket or whatever it is, but we connect the dots. And this is something which we find across many cultures, but it's by no means the only way of doing it. Right here in South Africa, the Ngam people, for instance, didn't make star patterns at all. These Bushman folk saw individual stars as representing individual things. So Orion's belt, those 1, 2, 3 stars, didn't form a belt or wasn't part of like an Orion. They saw the 3 zebras. Betelgeuse, or Betelgeuse, one of the stars in Orion, that they saw was a lioness. And the star that we see as the eye of the bull, or Aldebaran, that was a man who was out hunting. So it's interesting to note that the Ngam and other Bushman groups knew more stars by name than did the ancient Greeks. That's just because they were reading things in a different way. As it would be, is that even English? It appears we are lucky, friends, because we can see Orion. We can see Orion in February. Here is what the sky will look like tonight at 8 o'clock. So we can see the sun has just sort of set there, semi in the west. And if you turn around and you look a bit to your left, you should see high up in the sky a star, and then lower down, a very bright star. So by tradition or by custom or whatever, the brightest star that one can see, typically the first star that becomes visible, is given the name the evening star, or the morning star, depending. Often this would be Venus, which is a planet that is very shiny and very close to the Earth, and it appears very bright. In this case, the evening star is actually the planet Jupiter. The star up above, that one is the star Sirius, right? The dog star, which is the brightest star in the night sky as seen from Earth. Of course, the sun is a star, so we should say at night, right? But Jupiter regularly outshines Sirius, and so it gets the crown of evening star from time to time, only to be outdone when Venus makes its appearance. If we talk a little bit and wait for the sun to set, I wish I could do this in real life. Wouldn't that be nice? Then we begin to see more stars becoming visible. So, of course, the stars are always there. It's just that the sun makes the background sky too bright, and we only see things because of contrast. So the background is just too bright, so we can't see them. But as the sun slips away, or as the sun sets, notice we're doing a reading there. We're assuming the sun is setting. Our language doesn't seem to say that the earth is turning, but we're kind of stationary, right? And things are rising and setting. That's fine. As we begin to see more stars, I want you to pay attention to a few anchor stars. We will meet them soon. In the center, we've got Orion's belt, the three zebras from the Ngam people. If you go from the 3 to the right, there's a bright star, which is Sirius. If you go from those three down to the left, there's sort of a reddish star called Aldebaran, the eye of the bull. Just above the trees here is another bright star, Capella. Don't worry about the names, there won't be a quiz. And below Jupiter, there are two bright stars next to each other. That's Castor and that's Pollux, and they together form Gemini. Gemini was sort of a ancient Greek power couple, warriors who were like SEAL Team 6, 7, and 8 all together. So we've got just some anchor stars to pay attention to. Sirius over there, Aldebaran, Capella, and Gemini. So keep those in mind, because I want to point out something interesting, that the idea of naming individual stars as individual things and not patterns is not only confined to the Bushmen of South Africa, but across many other indigenous African groups as well. On page 119 of the Sky Guide, there's a selection of indigenous astronomy terms for stars and planets that we find across this part of the continent. I want to pull out two of them. And the first one is just the Milky Way. We'll see there's a variety of different names: Path of the Hunter, the Muslim's Path, Track of the Ancestor Spirits. So many of these things connote some kind of travel. There's a road or a path that one can travel on. Now, this is by no means an Africa-only thing. In Ukraine, for instance, the Milky Way is called Chumake Shlayach, which means the Chumaks Road. So, well, what is the Chumak? The Chumaks were traveling merchants who took their ox wagons from the Black Sea and Crimea and moved inland to the Ukrainian interior. And their cargo was salt. And so the story goes that some of this salt spilled out of the wagons, and that created this white trail in the heavens, which became a permanent route marker for these travelers. So the Chumaks Road, you can think of it as, the Salt Road. And I must admit, I can't help but think of the story every time I drive up to Sutherland, where, of course, the fantastic SALT telescope is exploring the southern skies. Now, at this point, somebody might ask, yeah, but why do we talk about the Milky Way? And that's a rather more messy story, if you can believe it. The story goes that Zeus wanted his half mortal, half divine son Hercules, or Heracles, to become immortal. Remember, Hercules is very strong. And apparently the only way you can do that is to have the baby drink the milk of a goddess. So he drugged his wife, as you do, and placed the baby at Hera's breast to suckle. But she woke up. And when she realized she was nursing a kid that wasn't hers, she yanked the baby away and flung it away. And of course, Hercules is very strong. And in that motion, it caused a divine spray of milk to squirt into the heavens. So there's that. Now, with that vivid image in your mind, go out this evening and see if you can spot the Milky Way. It's a favorite summertime target at this time of the year. Here's a map on page 14 of the Sky Guide. You should now notice some of those stars we just discussed. There's Orion's Belt, Castor and Pollux and Gemini down here. There's Capella, Aldebaran. So this map shows you the view looking northeast in summer. And there's a companion map on the next page, which shows the same time, but now you're looking southeast. And on this map, you should be able to see right low on the horizon two stars called the pointers, because they point, right? And they point to the small little constellation called Crux, which is the Latin for a crucifix. The two pointers are called Alpha and Beta Centauri, and they point to Crux. Already you've heard that astronomers like to speak in weird languages. So constellation names are Latin. Star names have a bit of Greek thrown in there, so Alpha Centauri. And otherwise, some of the names are just made up, and a good portion of the names are Arabic. So that's a whole fun mess to sort out. If we take a color view of the matter, if we swing over to the south, you can see just above the horizon, above the tree line, you can see Alpha and Beta Centauri, 2 pointers pointing to the cross. If you can't see them, then maybe there are trees in your horizon, or they're tall buildings, or you're just very short. So keep a lookout for them. They are quite low at this time, but through the magic of magic, we can advance the clock. Look at that. Isn't this amazing? I feel like Doctor Who. So here's the view tonight at 10 o'clock. You can see the Milky Way will be sort of rising up in the southeast. And if we take a quick look, there are maps for this, but take a quick look. 2 pointers, the Southern Cross. If you look there, you can see there's another cross. That's the false cross. And then there's this thing. There's this glorious thing, which is it's a show. You know what kind of show I mean, right? This is a star called Eta Carinae. Eta Carina. It is one of the most massive stars we know, and it's burning through its nuclear fuel at an absolutely suicidal rate, making it the prime candidate for the next massive stellar explosion, which is called a supernova. When a star like this goes supernova, get this, when this one star goes supernova, for a while, a week, maybe longer, it will shine brighter than 1 billion ordinary stars together. That's what happens when a big star goes supernova. And this star really isn't stable. It did a wobble when Herschel was in the Cape, not because of him, but it did a wobble when he was there. And just one day, it just suddenly and dramatically brightened. And it just continued growing brighter for many years. It almost reached as bright as Sirius, and it was a total puzzle. And after it dimmed, I mean, when astronomers looked at it, they saw that it was surrounded by a huge cloud of gas and dust, glowing brightly from this massive ongoing explosion. The star had literally blown its top. It had ejected the outer layers at speeds of millions of kilometers an hour. And I'd say if there's one reason to buy a telescope, then I'm going to say it's Eta Carina, because this is a Hubble Space Telescope image, right? And I'm not talking about a telescope that's going to cost you 1.2 billion. But with a small telescope, something portable, you can see much of this detail. You can see with your own eyes these 2 bright orange spheres of ejected matter that bulge out on either side of the star. It's quite literally, well, I think it is mind-blowing. Okay, I see I'm almost out of time, so I'll have to start making things up. I did highlight a second object. I think we could quickly take a squiz at that. And that was the Pleiades, the 7 sisters. 7 sisters, Greek mythology, they were 7 sisters. And then every now and then one of them was a bit like ordinary and decided to come down to Earth to do things. And then she would come back. Because if you look at the 7 sisters, most people can see 7, but then other times they can only see 6. And then they can see 7, and then they can see 6. So it probably depends on how much ouzo you've had or whatever. But it could also depend on the transparency, the clarity of the air. If the sky was a little bit crappy and hazy and dusty and so on, or if there was moisture, then one of the stars just dips below the range of human visibility. And that could, depending where you are, that could presage a change in the weather. So see how we're reading the stars here? Now the stars become a weather indicator. Anyway, so you'll see on this list, this Africa-specific list, that many of the indigenous names for this star cluster relate to plowing or digging or working the soil. In other words, agricultural practice. But if you look at the actual names, they all seem to be variations on a theme of something like Isilimela. Right? Look at the Tswana, look at the. Now, there's something else you need to know. Within these traditional groups, there is the ancient belief that when these digging stars, the Greek Pleiades, when these digging stars rise just before the sun rises, that is a warning from by nature to begin working the ground, to begin preparing for crops. So these stars served as a cosmic planting guide in a time when we didn't have Google Calendar and heaven only knows what else to tell us what the date is. We had to look at, and that's for the most time of our existence, right? We had to look around at signs to tell us what to do, or what was coming. And this is what the Pleiades, what the Isilimela did, is their appearance heralded the start of a new agricultural cycle, and in fact, a new year. And we can go and play around. We don't have time now, but we can fiddle around and we can find that the date when, approximate date, when these stars do rise before the sun, seen from our southern latitudes, that is in June. So June is when the Pleiades rises just before the sun. So I don't think it should come as a surprise that in isiXhosa, the month name for June is Isilimela, right? So I think that I always found fascinating how so many strands of our culture are woven into astronomy. I think the cheapest one probably is that the word month is just the word moonth, right? I'm going to meet you next moon. So when you owe me 5 rand, pay it back when the moon is again full. So that's a month later, right? So in many ways, our culture is interwoven, something like that, with what we see in the sky, and then specifically how we read them. Okay, so far we've had, if Belinda could give me a time check, I will have a long time. So far we've seen different cultures looking at the stars and their positions. But as I say, but wait, there's more. Because if we flip over to the Andes in Peru and we encounter the Inca people, they took a look at the sky and they said, you know what? These bright stars are very gauche. They're very gaudy. They're very bling. They're very over the top. What about all those cool dark patches along the Milky Way? So indeed, this is a good question. What about these dark patches? And for these people, the traditional Incas, they pay more attention, spiritually at least, to these dark clouds. By the way, this thing always looked to me like the Loch Ness monster rising up its long, dark serpentine neck with a small head, either coming to bite me or to ask, what am I doing at the telescope? To the Inca, the Milky Way was a river, and the dark patches, which we call dark nebulae, these dark patches were the shadows of spirit animals that came to drink from the water. So while they did include stars in their cosmic mythological zoo, they put a greater spiritual emphasis on the dark clouds themselves, of which the llama, which you can see there, is probably the most well known. The Aboriginal Australians made this whole thing into one big emu. And then I'm going to wrap up by showing you almost the last slide. Isn't that a nice nebula? Nice dark one. Looks like a horse's head, right? Astronomers give things numbers. Bad reading. I think we should give things names. I'm not going to call you 670621, whatever your social security number might be, right? 4 things to see this year. Later this month, February, eclipse of the sun. Don't miss it. It's going to be really cool. There are the dates and times. Contact your local center of the Astronomical Society. They'll be able to tell you where and when and how safely to look at the sun. If you want to see planets in the morning because you rise early or you can't sleep, or I don't know what your problem is. If you want to see the best display of planets in the morning, April, You'll see Mercury and Saturn converge on Mars. The moon will join just because the moon is extra, and then they will diverge again. So you'll have a beautiful show of three bright planets coming together and moving past each other like ships in the night. If you are an evening chap and you want to see them, before you go clubbing or whatever it is, so just after sunset, then June. In June, you'll see Jupiter and Venus, two bright ones, right? Venus is the brightest, Jupiter number 2. You'll see them come together. They'll put on a show in June. If you're in Cape Town, good luck with the weather. And then the fourth thing to see in August is there's an eclipse of the moon. It's so close, it's almost total. This you have to see. It's really wonderful. You'll no doubt know that full moon, or that eclipses of the moon happen only at full moon. And I want to leave that as one of the last thoughts. Our media reads the sky from an American perspective. And they tell us that January is the wolf moon. Africa never had wolves. February is the strawberry moon, or the sturgeon moon, or whatever. And that's a wrong reading. So at the center, we've been running a project for many years now to promote names for the full moon that are connected to South Africa's broader astronomical heritage. So, for example, we just had the Dassie moon in February, and you'll see that the Peace moon in August will be an eclipse. So you can grab this calendar and oodles of information about each of the moons from our website. And then I think I have nothing more to tell you other than there are your tools for reading the sky. Seasonal maps, daily maps, and special event maps are in the Sky Guide. Grab a free planetarium program like Stellarium. This is Stellarium. It's really pretty, really beautiful. Can't beat the price either. And then go and grab from ASSO's website, the Astronomical Society of Southern Africa, this planisphere. It's a star wheel. It's pieces of cardboard. You cut them out, stick them together with sticky tape, and you get a permanent, batteryless, load shedding resistant planisphere. You select your date, you select the time, turn the wheel until they match. Bob's your uncle, Charlene's your cousin, and inside this window are the stars that are visible from your location. And that means all I can now say is arrivederci. Bye. Thanks for listening.
Wow. Okay, that was spectacular. I've goosebumps and excitement all over. I think we definitely need to have you back and go over more. I'm sure we could have delved into so many different things there. Thank you for sharing the history of that, as well as those spectacular tools. To have that level of those sort of tools at one's disposal is amazing. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. And your clear passion and knowledge is infectious. I can ask if everybody can please put some questions. If you have any questions for Auke, please can you put into the Q&A box, and we can get to those now. I'll just check the chat and see if there's any in there now. Okay, I was going to ask sort of like a double-headed question. I think you've answered that. One was going to be what was sort of the one thing that we would have to watch this year. And I heard you mention that if you booked a trip to the observatory. Can you just explain to us a little bit about how that happens? It's not you don't just arrive, but do you need to book? How does one go about taking advantage of that resource?
Very good question. So in the olden days, it was terrible. You had to fill in a form. And in the form, you had to say which astronomers knew you and how big your telescope was and why you really, 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 really want to come. Things have advanced in leaps and bounds. There are now 2 day trips, 2 nighttime visits to the observatory in Cape Town and several during the day. And I apologize to my friends up country that there are also in Johannesburg and Bloemfontein. They are also strong on offering outreach evenings. So in the Sky Guide, there's a section giving all the contact details for the observatories around the country, as well as all the centers of the society. Folk who will take you out into the dark at night to some dark place and show you amazing things.
Fantastic, awesome. So I suppose people can go into their various websites there and track them down. Allison's asked us, sometimes Venus can be seen during the day. When would be the best time to see this?
That's a really, really, really great question. So amongst Xhosa boys, this was a badge of honor traditionally. You had to be able to see Venus in the daytime, otherwise you couldn't, sort of level up. So in the Sky Guide, there is a calendar of when these good dates are, but the logic is just when Venus is near the moon and the two are visible in the daytime sky, then it's easy for your eye to latch onto the moon because Venus is just a dot of light. Your autofocus doesn't quite know where to look. But if you find a date and time when the moon is near Venus in the daytime, then your eye sees the moon and then, oops, then you see Venus. So the Sky Guide has a list of dates. I'd be happy to send you the list if you want to.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Elizabeth is saying that the Bowden Observatory is very active with its shows. If you're ever near Bloemfontein, she can highly recommend it. That's for those who are up country. There's a strong recommendation from Bowden. And then Auke, just to say, we've got lots of comments. Loving your style of presentation. Love the talk. Brilliant presentation and inspired a lot of people and reignited love for astronomy, and a lot of people, just a lot of love coming through on the chat. Do you have to have a telescope to view the stars? And where would, in South Africa, I mean, I suppose, unless it's personal choice, where would sort of the best place in the country be to view stars?
Telescope is nice, but all you really need is just at least one eye. So all the highlights that I mentioned are all naked eye suitable. You can see the moon, you can see the planets and the stars. So the highlights are just with the naked eye. If you've got binoculars, they're not only good for bird watching and watching rugby or whatever it is people use them for. They're a premier astronomy tool. They give you a nice wide field of view. It's like having two mega eyes. And if you do have a telescope, well, good for you. You can certainly see a lot more than without it. As to where to go, the first thing would be to just leverage what local knowledge is available. So again, contact an observatory, contact a local center of the Astronomical Society, because they would have sussed out where there are places, say, with an outdoor loo or with electricity or where it is safe and all those things, or where there aren't mosquitoes, very important, that one. So contact the local centers. And if you are a hiking enthusiast and you want to go bunderbashing, these outdoor groups will very often naturally go to places where it will be darker at night. So that would be another good resource. Third comment maybe is, unless you really live under a bridge with floodlights on you, you can always see something from home. The number one killer of your vision is local light, a nearby light that is shining in your eye. So if you can find a way to block that off, you might only see a small part of the sky, but you'll be surprised what you can see from the middle of Joburg.
Wow, that's interesting. There we go. Give it a try tonight. Tracy has asked, what was the web address that we can look at for those the moon names? That's the Astronomical Societies.
That's correct. I'll pop it in the chat right now.
Thank you for your question, Tracy. There we go. And then an anonymous has asked you, what about Herschel's jewel box? Cryptic, I'm not sure what that.
Beautiful example. Thank you. Thank you for that example. That's a beautiful example. That thing is, for example, listed as 4755. So that's like this dull number, which I think is a bad reading. But give it an evocative name, like a jewel box, where the stars are multicolored, and it looks like you just opened a treasure from the Sierra Madres, and look at all these beautiful rubies and diamonds and rolls. So the jewel box is a beautiful small cluster. It sort of hangs off the Southern Cross. With a naked eye, you can see it as a little dot. With binoculars, you can just make out the triangular shape. And even a small telescope, you begin to see the individual colors of the stars. So right next to the Southern Cross.
There we go. Asked and answered. Well, maybe we can have a look there. Let's see.
So there we've got the Southern Cross. Let me see if I can just figure out how to put the lines on. No, of course I can't. Well, the lines are very dim, but you can see the lines there. So that's the bottom star. And if we zoom in that little thing, whoop, that is the jewel box. A beautiful little triangle of stars. And what is so mind-blowing is that one of them is this deep amber color, like a glowing coal amongst these little diamonds in the sky. And it's absolutely beautiful. Good question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's amazing. Michael has asked you, as a beginner, what spec telescope would you suggest to get at least to see the rings of Saturn?
To be 100% honest, I would suggest get binoculars. Use them to learn the night sky. If for some reason astronomy doesn't bite you or something, then you can always sell them to some rugby players or something. So, but you'll always use binoculars. No matter what your level in astronomy is, you always got binoculars with you. When it comes to specifically wanting to see Saturn or maybe Jupiter's bands, then a small telescope, I don't know if you can see my hand, about something like a 6-inch mirror, maybe even an 8-inch, is going to give you enough magnification to spot the rings. And then the magic happens with practice. So in the beginning, you can see nothing. This thing is broken. Oh, you must gooit weg. But then you realize you're just training your brain and eye, because our brain and eye isn't used to looking with one eye. You know, we're used to hunting and tracking and walking at night and so on. So get a 6 or an 8-inch, and whatever you get, don't give up. Even a really small 2-inch lens telescope is going to show you those things. Remember, Galileo had a telescope that was the lens was shorter than my thumb, right? And he discovered these things, right? So yeah, buy what you can afford, buy what you can transport. The worst thing is when you buy a 27 telescope and it's so big and heavy, it stays in the garage or the loft or whatever.
Again, very practical and sage advice. Okay, thank you so very, very much for joining us. I think I have to chat to Belinda. I'm sure we would love to have you back again and have another talk. I'm sure there's plenty more that you could share with us. And if our comments from, I guess, say from the participants, from the spectators today, have really enjoyed your presentation today. Thank you for everybody joining us for our first talk. Thank you to Belinda for behind the scenes. We look forward to seeing all of you in another month's time. Thank you very much. Thanks, Auke. Keep well. Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye.